Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here at the EPA National Waste event, focusing on the very important agenda of the circular economy. As an introduction, my name is Wesley Spindler. I am a Director of Sustainability and Business Strategy at Accenture. I lead our circular economy work globally, working with clients across industry around the globe, and also work with a lot of our partners on the circular economy topic, such as the World Economic Forum. And a lot of the insights that I will share today come from a handbook which I've co-authored on the circular economy, titled the Circular Economy Handbook, which offers a practical view on how organizations in the private and the public sector can take transformative steps towards circularity and create new opportunities for sustainable prosperity. So, given this audience might have a range of familiarity with the concept of circularity, I'll spend just a few minutes sharing with you our view on the definition of the circular economy and why we feel it's a really important agenda to embrace now. Next, I will take you through a high-level overview of our foundational concepts, that being what we refer to as the 5 circular business models and a couple of the key business model enablers, honing in on disruptive technology in particular. Finally, I'll share a few insights on the how-to. So how organizations can think about making their organizational pivots towards circularity, focusing in particular on the important role of the ecosystem. So before we kick off, just a note to say that if you do have questions throughout my presentation, I'll be covering quite a lot of content. So do use the app functionality, and I'll aim to answer as many questions as I can during the Q&A period. So firstly, to kick things off, I want to briefly align, as I said, on exactly what we mean by the circular economy for those that might be less familiar or have heard a few different definitions. But to really understand that, we have to understand what our current economic system looks like. What we refer to as linear. In essence, we take and extract resources, we produce them, we use them, and then typically they get thrown away, they go idle, or at best we might recycle. And ultimately, not only is this extremely harmful to our environment, but importantly, waste from linear value chains pose significant value that's lost. And that is a very critical component of what I'll touch on throughout this presentation. A circular economic system, on the other hand, to close the loop on our take, make, waste value chains, reinventing the way that we produce and consume so that waste is designed out, materials are looped back into the system, products are kept within productive use for as long as possible, and ultimately we move to more regenerative and restorative systems. Now, why is the circular economy such an important concept? Looking at the environmental big picture, and particularly, as I mentioned, the production and consumption story right now, we are unfortunately not on track. We consume what equates to 1.75 Earths each year, and we're on track for consuming 3 Earths each year by 2050. So essentially what that means is each year now we're consuming 75% more than our natural systems can regenerate. And resource use is also set to double by 2050, which is not a very positive outlook, and meaning that urgency is required behind the circular economy agenda and behind how we look at production and consumption, as linear value chains really cannot help us address these urgent challenges. And why we believe the circular economy is one of, not the only, but one of the critical paths to success in environmental restoration. Moreover, beyond the environmental good that the circular economy brings, there are a lot of other benefits. We position the circular economy as a significant contributor to business competitiveness. Our research has actually identified a $4.5 trillion opportunity globally to be unlocked through the circular economy. We've done a lot of research over the past 5 years to quantify that. Moreover, by embracing the circular economy, we truly believe organizations can spur innovation, enter new markets, and pivot to more resilient systems, which, as we're well aware in our current crisis, we see as more important than ever. And interestingly, just a final point here, consumers are also looking right now to organizations to provide more sustainable and circular products and services. A recent study by Accenture showed that there's been a surge in conscious consumption due to the pandemic, with around 50% of consumers saying they're making more sustainable choices, and almost 90% saying they're likely to continue with these habits. So again, just highlighting some of the really important opportunities that companies need to embrace when they think about circularity. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor in terms of why we really feel it is critical. Now, moving on to the foundational concepts, how do we actually tap into that opportunity and that value and transform waste into something very positive? We've actually defined what we call 5 circular business models, as you can see here on the slide, that cut across the full value chain from design to end of use and act as a framework for this circular transformation. So I'll just go through each quickly here. The first being circular inputs at the very start of the value chain. So this is about using renewable sources, bio-based materials, and man-made materials that are recycled or highly recyclable to eliminate partial or total waste outputs and also replace uncircular products. The next 3 business models, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, cut across the product life cycle. So these really touch on the consumption and how we enable new consumption patterns. The first being product as a service. This is where a business retains ownership of a product and sells the benefits through a service or a subscription model. Urban Volts, just to mention an example here, which is headquartered in Dublin, is a leading global provider of lighting as a service. So essentially, they offer light as opposed to selling a light bulb. And that means they also offer ongoing maintenance and replacement of the products as required. In addition to helping their customers save energy, this also helps customers save up to 70% on lighting costs. The next business model is product use extension. So this is all about how you extend product use through design considerations, repairs, upgrades, resales, and so on for second, third, or fourth use. And then we have on the bottom of the right-hand side, sharing platforms. That's all about how we increase the utilization rate of products and assets through shared ownership, access, and usage. A very popular example would be something like Airbnb, so utilizing unused housing space. And then finally, we have resource recovery. That's about using the embedded materials or energy at the end of use of a product and recovering through collection, aggregation, and processing. Another Irish example I'd like to call out is Food Cloud, which is a social enterprise that works with food businesses nationwide, such as farms, manufacturers, and distributors who rescue, restore, and redistribute surplus food. So a really great organization working to recover resources. And through our analysis of up to, or moreover, over now 1,500 case studies that we've looked at in the circular space, we've actually found that companies are really truly embracing these business models, which we defined back in 2013, 2014, but to varying degrees of impact. We've therefore identified a few key enablers that we really feel are instrumental to the success of all of the business models and to create a real transformation across the value chain. So this is things such as the role of circular design and the importance of setting up reverse logistics systems. But of all the enablers we've identified, and I won't cover all of them now, we believe that the role of disruptive technologies is actually the key enabler of the business models and can really accelerate circular progress for the benefits of organizations as well as broader ecosystems and societies. And as you can see from this slide here, there's actually quite a few technologies. We believe there's 27 here on this page that are critical for enabling circularity. But I guess the key thing to call out here is when we're talking about technology, we're not just talking about digital technology, which is things like IoT, AI, and machine learning, but also physical technologies, so tools such as robotics and 3D printing, and also biological technologies, so things like bio-based material and energy. And what we found with these technologies is that when they're used in combination, they're even more powerful in providing substantial, scalable circular solutions. Just calling out one example, which I really love, Aero Farms is an indoor vertical farming company based out of the US, and they use a combination of biological technology, so aeroponics in this case, and digital technologies, so things like predictive analytics for superior agriculture productivity. And the results are very, very impressive. So they're actually 390 times more productive than traditional agriculture. Their methods require 95% less water than traditional methods. And they also, because of their real innovative nature, the fact they're a very, very sustainable and circular business, they receive a lot of other benefits. So from a cultural perspective, for example, they're a company of 100, but they actually receive over 2,000 applications a month. So clearly there is a pull not only from the market, but from the workforce in seeing circular economy business models and technologies come to life. Now, moving on to the last section of this presentation, I'd like to just spend a few minutes turning to the how. How do organizations transition to circular businesses to create real concrete impact? So it's great to hear about the foundations and some of the key concepts, but it's really important to actually bring that to life. And we believe when we think about how you embed circularity in a business of varying different types, you must mature across 4 dimensions, which you can see here on the slide. Some are quite intuitive. So for example, most companies, when they're starting their circular journeys, start with operations. So that's about accelerating existing sustainability targets to address the value lost across business processes such as water, energy, carbon, and waste. And the benefit of kickstarting your circular journey with operations is it often offers short-term paybacks and quick wins. But ultimately, what we like to see with circular operations is a move towards net neutrality, or ultimately a view towards positivity and regeneration. And when we're seeing a few organizations touch on that in their ambitions and goals. Tesco in Ireland is an interesting example. They've purchasing biogas made from surplus food to power stores. So interesting example of a retailer in Ireland looking at circular operations. Next, on the top right-hand side of the slide, just looking at products and services. So this is all about how you rethink the inputs to in the life cycle of your products, as I discussed when covering the business models. So there's very complex when you're thinking about reimagining your product portfolio, but it is very, very critical, of course, in the circular transition. And then more nuanced, but really equally important to the circular journey, and where we see real leading organizations tackling quite successfully are actually on those last 2 dimensions. The first being culture and organization. So how companies are embedding circular principles into the fabric of their organization to create a circular business. And circularity must be at the heart of the organization's purpose, strategy, and mindset, and be championed by leadership in order to be successful. And we've seen this again and again with those real circular leaders. The culture that they really bring to life with circularity front of mind is really critical. And then finally, looking at the role of ecosystems. This is really about how you look beyond the internal organization, your operations, your products and services, your workforce and culture, and even beyond your value chain to partner with organizations that you can work with to collectively make a difference. So this could be your suppliers, your customers, and then importantly, working proactively with industry peers, even policymakers and investors. We like to say no company is an island, and really the role of the ecosystem is very critically important to the circular transition. And on that note, with the importance of the role of the broader ecosystem in mind, I wanted to mention the critical role industries have in delivering holistic system-level circular transformation. You can see here on the slide, we've listed 4 that are particularly prominent and interesting in the Irish economy. So agriculture, consumer goods, electricity, and information and communications technology, or high tech. And in the interest of time, I won't dive into detail. There's lots of challenges and opportunities across them all, but I will just touch on each one briefly. First being agriculture. It's obviously a highly resource-intensive industry. And I think really interesting is the point I mentioned earlier on regenerative practices. Danone is a great example of a company that's forged a multilateral alliance with leaders from the full agricultural value chain, including animal health and welfare companies, crop nutrition specialists, and an AI agri-food startup to start to innovate on how to apply regenerative agricultural practices across dairy farms. So really cool example of a big organization in the consumer goods space looking at regenerative agriculture. Electricity is another prominent industry in Ireland. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges around e-waste globally and the premature retirement of electrical equipment and materials. So it's important to really take measures to extend the life cycle of equipment and also capture the value at the end of life of all of those materials, things like copper, for example, that are within electrical equipment. Schneider Electric is a really interesting energy company that uses IoT to facilitate predictive maintenance of its switchboards for its customers and has a real focus on product life extension. FMCG, this is quite, again, a prominent industry, or consumer goods. There's a lot of focus right now in terms of plastics and packaging. So we see this globally. Ireland is no exception. And we're seeing a lot of companies like Coca-Cola or others setting ambitious targets in relation to recyclable packaging and also the recycled content of packaging, and even companies moving so far as looking at reusables. And then finally, to mention ICT. So considering Ireland is the data capital of Europe, which is a really exciting opportunity, but also is a challenge given that by 2027, data centers in Ireland will use the same amount of electricity as Dublin. So they're quite resource and energy intensive. The ICT industry must really find ways to not only decrease e-waste, which, as I said, is a significant global challenge, but also increase efficiency and reduce waste in data centers. Google is a great example of a company that has an aim to increase the circularity of their data centers. They have a number of programs looking at circular servers and how they increase remanufacturing, resale, and reuse of servers, which is obviously a very critical component within the data center. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor of the importance of industry. Now, the final point I just want to touch on in relation to the ecosystem is sharing a few thoughts on the role of investors and policymakers in the circular transition. Firstly, there's a real significant financing gap in the transition to a circular economy, which must be closed through the financial services industry's leadership and innovation. We are seeing a lot of companies in the financial services space start to accelerate their circular agendas. Banco Intesa, an Italian financial services institution, is a really interesting example. They have a circular economy framework loan, which is the largest credit line of its kind in Europe. They launched a €5 billion credit facility in 2018 to support businesses adopting circular models. They also have an innovation center to support startups and connect them with investors. And overall, they've financed 62 projects over the past 2 years for a total value of about €760 million. So they're really driving the circular economy agenda quite heavily. And then finally, looking at the role of policymakers, there's a lot of mechanisms that policymakers should look at, which will help them remove barriers to circular progress. And I would say this is particularly relevant at this time, of course. We're seeing this an increasingly important agenda across Europe. with the Circular Economy Action Plan forming a key component of the EU's Green Deal, and also in Ireland, the recently launched Waste Action Plan for the circular economy, which is being discussed more during this broader event. And you see here on the right-hand side of the slide, we've actually defined a number of actions we feel are really critical to creating the right level of impact at the regional and the international level. So things like applying tax incentives for circular behavior, taking a more active role in prioritizing investment in things like circular infrastructure, and also setting new product quality and safety regulations which incentivize the use of secondary resources, for example. And just to call out one example, the Finnish government is a really interesting case study. They were actually the first country in the world to prepare a national roadmap to the circular economy back in 2016. And according to their analysis, by 2030, the added value provided by a circular economy could be at least 3 billion euros per year for Finland. So really, really interesting. And we're seeing that continue to progress across Finland and in other countries in Europe as well. So that wraps up the content I have today. So just to close on a couple key points, really, as I said, not only is the circular economy a real means for environmental good, but there is a significant opportunity for business, for government, for investors to embrace this agenda, to create new ecosystems and really drive a prominent transformation. And we really do feel the time to act is now. So really interested to hear your questions and comments, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this presentation.